Dziękuję, Lorenzo. Dick, zapraszam. Jest, tak. Dick jest przedstawicielem Szwecji. Dick jest w ogóle profesorem architektury. No i nazywamy właściwie, ja kupiłem taki pogląd, ale to jest naprawdę guru cohousingu, jeżeli chodzi o Europę. Po prostu jest uczestnikiem wielu konferencji. Jego zdanie jest rzeczywiście bardzo ważne. Zapraszam.
Bardzo Cię proszę.
Thank you. So my name is Dick Urban Westbro. I am an architect researcher, nowadays retired, and I've been doing research on co-housing since 1964. After 32 years as an activist and researcher, I finally moved into co-housing myself. And the last 18 years I've been living in a co-house in Stockholm. So what I say here is based on both research and personal experience and my role as an activist in the national Swedish co-housing organization. When I talk about co-housing, I refer to a type of housing with common spaces and shared facilities and private apartments. There are other smaller types of communes, smaller collectives where young people share a villa or a big apartment, but I do not include them here, although they are quite interesting too. So private apartments is included in the concept of co-housing. I think the best way to introduce what co-housing means in Sweden is to tell you something about my own co-house. It consists of 2 staircases, apartments around 2 staircases in an inner city urban neighborhood. So it's only our 2 staircases that belong to the co-house. There are 23 apartments, but we have actually invited people from the neighborhood to join. So we are now about 50 adult people and a number of children and teenagers. And the 50 adults, we are divided into 5 cooking teams with the responsibility for cooking dinners for each other 4 evenings a week. And each individual member is doing a piece of work 2 times every 5th week. If you think of 5 weeks, 4 dinners each week means 20 dinners. So 18 out of the 20 dinners, I, as an individual, I don't have to plan for dinner, I don't have to do shopping, I don't have to cook, I don't have to do dishwashing. I just come home and I sit down at a set table where my wonderful neighbors have put their heart into cooking for me. And it's such a beautiful experience not to have to worry about that. 2 out of 20 dinners I will leave my job at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, perhaps. So I have to negotiate with my employer to be free. Or do work in the evening, cleaning or preparing the day before, but then I work about 4 hours. So one important aspect of this co-housing model is to save time. This is what I've explained in my co-house is a typical example that was worked out by a group to which Ingela Blomberg belongs. It was founded at the end of the 1970s, and the group has worked for 35 years, something like that. And they produced this book to the left with sort of new ideas and also a little program for what to do. And I would say it arrived just at the right moment when there was a demand, a request from the general public, especially from women's organizations who saw the need to improve their daily life by applying this model. I want to point to this illustration from the book. It says here, if 15 households, 15 apartments abstain, reduce the standard size of the private apartment only 10%, they can get all these common spaces. And if there are 40 households, they can get much more by abstaining only 10% of private dwelling space. And then they can have library, media room, common dining room, playroom for children, guest rooms, exercise room, sauna, and a lot of things that the residents can decide about themselves. This actually means that you raise the quality of housing without raising the cost, because the total volume of housing is the same. And that is the real essence of the co-housing model, which is the most frequent one. And I think Ingela's group, consisting of about a dozen women, 10 women, they continue to agitate for this model, and they visit co-housing everywhere almost, and report back, and they act as a pressure group, an advisor to those who are interested. Historically, and still today, the main driving force behind Swedish co-housing is the demand for emancipation of women, equal status between men and women. The model was developed in a situation where still women would have to choose between their career, working career, or to have children. Having children would mean heavy burden for housework and taking care of children. And I don't know if you can read the text in blue up there, that it says that this housework, to reduce housework, is an important factor to have equal status in the labor market and also in political life. Because if you don't have these facilities, then, and the burden to do housework and take care of children rests on women, then they can't be expected to have equal status in society. And I think even if we have had a tremendous development of services, such as daycare centers and all kinds of equipment in homes to relieve, to make it easier to cope with housework, it's still a burden, and it still explains why there is not equal situation for men and women. So that continues to be a driving force. a good environment for children is also an important factor behind co-housing. All over the world, families have fewer children, almost everywhere. And also, divorce rate and change of household structure means that there are more and more households with only one child, and more single parents, mainly single mothers. And they have a very difficult situation. Also the children, they have less quality of life, I would say, but in co-housing, parents, single parents and other parents can cooperate, and all children, even if they are single child households, they get brothers and sisters, and they get nice facilities, attractive facilities, as you can see here, parties with children, playrooms, which is very difficult to achieve in the normal housing situation. So good environment for children is a very important part of the co-housing model. Interesting medical research shows that people who live alone, they have less welfare and they don't live as long as people who have social contacts. Those who understand that better are women. Because of tradition, historical reasons, they have better social competence, but the fact is that I think in all parts of the world, including low-income countries, Africa, Asia, everywhere, you have more and more households that are smaller, and you have higher mobility, and you have one-person households. Of course, in Sweden, the situation is sort of ahead of others in the sense that we have 50% of all households are one-person households, and 25% are two-person households. I think there are some other countries with that same high number, which means that, in a sense, traditional family living is an exception. Whether we like it or not, there is a need to solve the problem of single households. Of course, you can have social contact in your job, in hobbies, you can keep your contact with your relatives, but the fact is that many households live alone and they don't feel that well by being alone in a big city. So we think that co-housing is a very good instrument to live longer and feel better in your life. The Swedish model, I think, is different from the model in other countries, in the sense that Ingela's group, who could have solved their problem of having co-housing for themselves, they said that this is not only an issue for us, it is of general interest for many, many people. And since we had good experience, I would say, we had good experience of public housing by municipal companies. Municipalities in Sweden have formed municipal housing companies who are supposed to cover the needs of every citizen. So the women's organizations, all the women's organizations in Sweden, almost all of them, demanded co-housing in the 1960s and the 1970s. But they were resisted by patriarchal society. Male-dominating labor movement, trade unions, cooperative housing movement were all dominated by men who were dreaming of having housewives doing their services, ironing their shirts, cooking for them only. So they were rather conservative in family matters. And they didn't want co-housing to have equal status where men were also supposed to cook and take their responsibility for this type of everyday housework. But around 1970, at the end of the 1970s, around 1980, there was a new generation of more modern type of men and more women in politics. So there was time. And in Stockholm, this vice mayor, you can see up there in the top, he thought he would meet the demands by women's organizations and build co-housing. So he decided to build 20 co-houses in Stockholm, and just ordering the various public housing companies to build 6 each of them, and then some others. And it was done. So you can see some examples there. And they were all filled with people who more or less survived until today, with a few exceptions. One example is this one, an early example. It consists of 33 apartments, and I want to point to the fact that this is a plan of the ground floor. There is one entrance here and one entrance here. So when you come home from the train station or bus or whatever, you pass here and you see who is cooking for the day. Here is the dining room for everyone. Here is a little office with a TV room later. And here is a playroom. And this was a daycare center run by the municipality. And there was a sauna and a ceramic workshop and some other common spaces, including in the basement a music room for teenagers. A lot of public spaces where the municipal housing company for once listened to the co-housing association, who put their demands and who said, yes, we don't want the rents to be higher, so we will abstain from 10% of our private space because we get so much of the common spaces, exactly as Ingela's group described. So, of this model, about 35, maybe 40 co-houses in Sweden have been built. But there are some others. This is actually a variation of the same model. It is called the second half of life model. Senior co-housing, perhaps we can call it. So there was a group of people who said that we who have made sacrifices, worked so much for our children, now that the children move from home, we want to enjoy the rest of our life with supporting each other and enjoying the company of each other. So this is, one can say, 40-plus model with seniors, but still active seniors, not the high dependency. But we think we can draw conclusions from this model to the high dependency. So the first one was built, it's called Färdknäppen in Stockholm, and it looks like this. And many common spaces are here. Some are on the rooftop with extremely nice view of the whole of Stockholm. And there is a new bee society producing honey, very important for urban green spaces. And there's a lot of common spaces, which I don't have time to talk about, but very attractive. Also carried out with participation of the residents to be, the prospective residents. And here you can see there are a lot of old people. And there, I think this co-house, of the 45 existing co-houses in Sweden, this has the highest age structure. But I want to emphasize, and Ingela is an external member. You don't live there, but you participate in cooking and know everything about it. But I want to point out, as chairman of the National Co-housing Association. This is the most active of all the Swedish co-houses. They organize seminars, they get published, they have good relations to media, they invite mayors, ministers, and they are really active. They don't sit down and wait for public aid to come to them. This is, again, a different model. It's a quite big co-house, 184 apartments, all connected with a very long corridor. So you have tower blocks, about 10 floors, 8 or 10 floors, and then in the ground floor, this white, are corridors. Very nicely designed, and all these orange spaces, 2,000 square meters of common spaces, including daycare centers, big gymnastic hall, ceramics, library, all those spaces. So each individual living here has access to 2,000 square meters of attractive spaces. This is impossible to achieve, I think, in the normal. Only the extremely rich billionaires can have houses like this. So this is a billionaire dream for ordinary citizens, and it's actually a lot of low-income people living here. It's not a middle-class phenomenon. Overview of the Swedish situation is here. Here are the 45 co-houses existing, which are functioning, and this is the ownership situation described on the map. So the red ones, they are the ones with public rental tenure. Municipal housing companies owning the co-houses and having agreement with the co-housing association about managing the common spaces and a lot of things. The blue ones, they are condominiums, some kind of ownership, I can say. The green ones are cooperative rental. It's a very special form. It's still owned by a housing company, but it is the co-housing association acting as the body with the contract, and the individual households in turn rent from the co-housing association, which gives the co-housing association a very strong position in selecting tenants and in managing their own without having the burden of ownership, if you understand what I mean, the burden of ownership. They still have a housing company who can intervene to solve services and so on. So it gives a lot of freedom. And then the light yellow-green co-houses, they are starter groups, new groups negotiating with the municipality for, there are many more, but these are the ones who have serious negotiations about planning and building their co-houses. So more co-houses are on their way. These are some figures, but I think the picture I showed gives a better overview, but if you want, you can send this out and you can see the figures about the various types of co-houses. Let me just say that almost all the Swedish co-houses are urban co-houses in inner city location or urban situation, not like in Denmark or United States, where you have a lot of co-houses far away from the city, on land they own themselves, and usually combined with some cultivation and things like that, like rural or semi-urban situations. In Sweden, it's mainly urban. So, I have, I think, painted a rather positive image. So, are there any problems? Yes, there are some problems. and we have to address them. Some co-houses in Sweden have been dekollektivized. That means they don't function very well any longer. The common spaces are not used. There are specific reasons for this, which we don't have time to go into right now. But most of them do survive. And one reason why we have problems is that housing companies, they produce housing for normal type of residents. Co-housing comes in as an extra thing. So the housing companies, which are usually big bureaucracies, they consider co-housing to be a little disturbing factor in the normal routines. We want them to see it the other way, that we, in co-housing, we pave the way for new ideas also useful for the rest of the housing stock. But they don't always see it like that. And to have good life in co-house, people need to collaborate, to follow certain rules. We think that there are only a few rules that are necessary, not too many, but they have to be respected and discussed, and it doesn't always happen that people agree. So we need methods to find agreement, to make compromise, and that is not always taking place. So I think it's important when starting a co-house to establish a co-housing culture where the group of people work out procedures to create a good atmosphere where everybody can come forward and express their ideas and respect majority decisions, and sometimes, for instance, in the United States and in other places, there is sort of consensus methods to come to decisions, not necessarily majority decisions. One important new driving force behind co-housing is to save resources by sharing resources. I've already talked about it, and it has become, in the general public debate, a very important factor. I recommend you to read this book, What is Mine is Yours, Collaborative Consumption. It is giving examples mainly from the United States and the UK about all the things you can do through internet by pooling resources together without necessarily living in co-housing. But in co-housing you can save energy, you use much less resources for food, you waste less, etc., etc. So co-housing is a very good argument to promote environmental friendly lifestyles and resource saving. Finally, if there is time, do I have 2 minutes more?
Yes, okay.
I've talked about Sweden. The #1 country in the world is Denmark. And they have at least 10 times as many co-houses, maybe 20 times as many in comparison with the population as Sweden. Hundreds and hundreds of co-houses. Unfortunately, there is no national organization, but there is one for senior co-housing, which would be interesting to learn from in the future. And that lady is working for that senior co-housing organization. So there's much to learn, and they have a big variety of examples. Many of the co-houses here are groups of one family units, row houses around common spaces, and there are also urban houses. In the United States, the co-housing movement is growing very rapidly. I have written here that there are 220 projects listed. This is already outdated information. I think there are more than 250 co-houses, and they have also an active national organization which is promoting co-housing and there is a team of architects, Charles Durrett and Catherine McCammon, who are designing very skillfully well-functioning co-houses in the United States. And the special feature of the American Co-Housing Association is that they arrange conferences, meetings, annual meetings, and they use co-housing as an instrument to promote peaceful resolution of conflict, where I think we are lagging behind. I think we should learn from them. So, a lot of things happen in the United States. In Germany, they have something called building communities. That means not necessarily housing communities, but people can build together. According to German law, independent groups can come together and get some support from federal states or municipalities to find land and a project leader and establish housing of their own for that group. This is a model that does not exist yet in Sweden. But in Germany there are hundreds and hundreds of them. I would like to call them building communities because they emphasize building and planning and even designing together. When they move in, they can do things together, but not necessarily continue to have a spirit of sense of community. It depends, but many of them do. So that's really interesting. And I have visited some in Hamburg, where they got active support from the city of Hamburg to find land. It's not subsidy, but they get some help to find land, to get project leaders, and be encouraged in general. And this is one of them who turned into co-housing after they finished the building process. So they do a lot of things together. And then, of course, you have the eco-village movement, which I haven't mentioned, and some included in the co-housing movement. I think there is a difference. And one of them, one of the biggest and oldest and most famous, is in Findhorn, Scotland. They are special in the sense that it is based on cultural and a cultural idea of togetherness. So not all co-houses are members of this international network, but it's a real interesting example of a different model which belongs to the family of co-housing. They have a lot of cultivation of their own and a lot of cultural activity, and they have bed and breakfast and conferences and so on. I'm not going to talk about Italy, but I discovered that there was an existing organization of 30, I would call it some kind of co-housing. I don't know if you know about this model. It's only a specific type of thing they call comunità e famiglia. 30 examples where the residents share everything, like a small communist society. So I think it would be interesting to learn from them. And then we have the new development, of which I will not talk. But in Southern Europe, which has been behind development earlier, there are now new co-housing organizations formed. And also in Poland, congratulations to that, Czech Republic, and Hungary, and many other countries. In Japan, they are building their number 6 co-house based on studies of the Swedish model. And we get delegations from South Korea. We've already had 4 or 5 delegations, and we have 4 more coming because they are really keen to develop it. So it's spreading all over the world, and I think that will be, I've used up too much time So I thank you very much.